Do you believe you've already discovered every detail regarding Little House on the Prairie, such as the themes of affection, altruism, and familial connections? Then prepare yourselves for a different reality, one that is darker and more distressing. This is because the performers who once occupied a place in your heart were forced to endure conclusions to their lives that were far from being fairy tales. One passed away in confidentiality amidst gossip concerning gender identity. Another succumbed to AIDS and faced social condemnation. One passed away at a young age just as their stardom was starting to flourish. And today, for the very first time, you shall discover the agonizing reality behind those iconic roles. Catherine McGregor as Harriet Oleson. Catherine McGregor, who was born with the name Dory Dean McGregor, arrived on January 12, 1925 in Glendale, California. She secured her place in the history of American television when she accepted the role of Harriet Oleson in Little House on the Prairie, beginning in 1974 at the age of 49. The character of Harriet, the unagreeable, stern, and rumor-loving merchant, not only provided humor but served as the pungent seasoning for a program centered on affection and ethics. Catherine passed away on November 13, 2018 in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, reaching the age of 93. At the time of her passing, she possessed an estimated wealth of approximately $2 million. In contrast to many of her peers who persisted in seeking fame, she retreated from the cameras once the show concluded and dedicated the remainder of her years to local theater, instructing children in drama, and following Hinduism. Notably, in 1984, when the cast gathered again to record the series' conclusion, she chose not to participate, not because she was residing in India, as was speculated, but for a far more profound reason occurring backstage. Catherine suffered emotional distress while being enclosed by the heavily masculine professional environment on the Little House set. Based on reports from Melissa Gilbert and McGregor herself, Michael Landon, the production leader, often told vulgar sexual jokes immediately before recording began. Tales regarding bee pollen for rejuvenation or jokes related to the body caused McGregor to feel insulted. As a seasoned performer with a background in theater, she was not used to, nor was she willing to tolerate having her emotional preparation disrupted by crude humor. To McGregor, portraying Harriet was not merely for laughs, it was a profound villainous role, and she required the environment to inhabit the character. The infidelity scandal involving Michael Landon, Cindy Clerico, who was only 18 years of age. For McGregor, this was not just a violation of private morality, but the total breakdown of her creative standards. She had maintained a close friendship with Lynn, Landon's previous spouse, and saw the entire aftermath once the infidelity was revealed. When Cindy, who had become Landon's new spouse, was brought back to the production as a makeup artist, driving an expensive Porsche into the lot, the familial spirit of the staff disappeared for good. McGregor was no longer able to find the collaborative spirit or the creative honor she once held dear. Consequently, in quietude, she walked away from the limelight, turned down the final show, and selected a journey of faith, community theater, and internal tranquility to rescue herself from the burden of stardom. Michael Landon as Charles Ingalls. Michael Landon was born on October 31, 1936, in New York. He turned into a television legend in the United States when he stepped into the character of Charles Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie, starting in 1974 when he was 38 years old. Portraying the image of a benevolent and ideal father on the screen, Landon captured the affection of millions of spectators and stood as America's television patriarch for nearly 10 years. Nevertheless, his life concluded in a catastrophic way on July 1, 1991, when Michael Landon died at age 54 from pancreatic cancer. The condition was identified only a few months prior during a skiing trip, which startled all of Hollywood. Landon breathed his last at his home in Malibu with his latest wife by his side. At the moment of his passing, his wealth was valued at roughly $40 million. Tucked behind the kind grin of Charles Ingalls was a personal life filled with debate and numerous hidden facets. During the early 1980s, while Little House on the Prairie was at the height of success, Landon became involved in a messy legal separation with his second spouse, Lynn. Actress Karen Grassel, who portrayed his wife in the program, disclosed that Landon frequently made vulgar remarks bragging about his renewed sexual activities right on the set. Initially, these were merely uncomfortable quips during makeup sessions, but eventually a hidden truth came to light. Landon was involved in an affair with 18-year-old Cindy Clerico, who served as a stand-in for the child performer Melissa Francis. The entire production staff felt exhausted, and the reputation of the ideal father started to break. However, that was merely a small portion of the problem. Close friends mentioned that Lynn, the loyal wife who once managed Christmas celebrations alone while her spouse played cards in his study, had investigated the signs and caught Landon with his lover at a hidden meeting place. The press quickly intervened, contributing to rumors that she had flung a bottle of vodka at her spouse in a state of fury. Even though Landon attempted a fresh start with a third marriage to Cindy in 1983, the impact never truly disappeared. Veteran fellow actor Catherine McGregor declined to return for the series' conclusion in 1984, not because she had become a religious ascetic in India, as was speculated, but because she was entirely exhausted by Mike and his treatment of women. Thus, behind the camera lights and the joy of the public was a sequence of errors, betrayals, and permanent rifts, all knitted together into a depiction of Michael Landon that was both magnificent and agonizingly sad. Victor French as Isaiah Edwards. Victor Edwin French arrived on December 4, 1934, in California. In 1974, at the age of 40, he accepted the character of Isaiah Edwards in Little House on the Prairie. He played a coarse man who had a penchant for drinking but possessed a benevolent spirit. With his recognizable straw hat, dense facial hair, and instinctive acting technique, Victor became the secondary heart of the program, appearing alongside Michael Landon in one of the most exquisite creative partnerships ever witnessed on American TV. Victor French passed on June 15, 1989 in Los Angeles, only 3 months following a diagnosis of lung cancer. He died at 54 years old, leaving behind 3 offspring and a cherished creative heritage. Nonetheless, according to Karen Grassel, who portrayed Ma, Michael Landon once remarked that French did not die of cancer, but rather of alcohol. In a confidential talk, Landon stated directly, "drank himself to death." That remark stripped away the last disguise, exposing a tragic reality regarding the quiet struggle between stardom and individual trauma that French had always hidden. At the time of his death, his wealth was estimated at roughly $2 million. What few realize is that the role of Mr. Edwards, the character most linked with Victor French, nearly didn't happen. NBC had firmly disagreed when Michael Landon proposed French, claiming he lacked the looks or fame the network desired. But Landon demanded his friend remain, stating, "I don't need a movie face, I need a real heart." He was correct. Transitioning from someone who typically played antagonists in Gunsmoke or Bonanza, Victor reached new heights, becoming a partner, a foster father, and a hallmark of benevolence in the difficult Prairie. Still, behind every moving moment were quiet times that remained unspoken. French experienced 2 unsuccessful marriages and battled alcoholism for a long duration. The stress of being a superb supporting performer, constantly existing in someone else's shadow, was a heavy burden for him. Despite being in many movies and television programs, French was frequently restricted to roles as the tough man with a heart. It wasn't until he played Mark Gordon in Highway to Heaven that he truly smiled with fulfillment. "I'm working with the man I love," he remarked regarding Landon. Perhaps that bond was truly the most exquisite segment of Victor French's life. Richard Bull as Nels Olson. Richard William Bull was born on June 26, 1924, in Zion, Illinois. In 1974, at the age of 49, he started playing Nels Olson, the gentle and composed spouse who endlessly tolerated his controlling wife Harriet in the popular television show Little House on the Prairie. Although his role wasn't boisterous or flashy, he earned the affection of the public as a steady parental figure in a turbulent world. Richard Bull passed on the morning of February 3, 2014 in Calabasas, California, due to pneumonia issues at age 89. During his last days, he resided with his spouse, actress Barbara Collentine, at the Motion Picture and Television Fund. At the moment of his passing, his wealth was valued at approximately $1.5 million, a humble amount, but enough to show a consistent career. Regardless of his quiet demeanor, Little House served as an unforeseen pivot. In a sparse interview, he once mentioned that the character of Nels was originally intended to be a minor role for just a few segments. However, after a short talk with Michael Landon, the director and lead actor, he was offered a contract for 7 years. Bull remarked that he was genuinely surprised by the news. Beneath that steady appearance was a storm of feelings. How could a theatrical performer, accustomed mainly to small roles, sustain years on a long-running television show that became a national success? But what few understood was that stardom brought a silent stress. Bull once admitted that remaining as Nels for such a long time, while appreciated, occasionally made him feel stuck in a single category. As a reserved man who favored the theater over the screen, he found it difficult to exist in the television limelight and meet fan expectations. Once Little House concluded, Bull continued working with Michael Landon on Highway to Heaven, which served as evidence of their lasting professional bond. Still, he kept a distinct way of life, avoided Hollywood, and chose to pass his last years in a residence for retired performers. Perhaps it was that unpretentiousness that became the most valuable heritage Richard Bull bequeathed to his public. Kevin Hagen as Dr. Hiram Baker. Kevin Hagen was born on April 3, 1928 in Chicago, Illinois. In 1974, at 46 years old, he gained the affection of millions of spectators with his character as Dr. Hiram Baker in Little House on the Prairie. He was the quiet, loyal town physician who prioritized the lives of others over his own. His portrayal with the black medical bag, benevolent eyes, and steady voice became a symbol of the medical archetype in the difficult American frontier. Kevin Hagen passed away on July 9, 2005, in Grants Pass, Oregon, following a prolonged fight with esophageal cancer at the age of 77. His wealth at the time of passing was valued at about $1 million. It was a humble sum, but sufficient to represent a quiet, creative life devoid of scandals or showing off. What the public was unaware of is that his esophageal cancer was not merely a physical state, but the consequence of decades of suffering and melancholy. In a personal letter to a trusted friend disclosed after his passing, Hagen mentioned that he felt his sickness originated from the soul's agony rather than the body. As a performer frequently stuck in supporting characters, he often felt overlooked, viewed merely as a plot device instead of a lead figure. That prolonged period of being unseen left him feeling aimless, and he sometimes questioned his own value in the creative world. The most debated secret was his choice to turn down chemotherapy when initially diagnosed in 2004. In a sparse interview before his death, Hagen stated he was not scared of dying, only of living with nothing more to offer. While experts condemned this as giving up, many supporters viewed it as a final act of independence from a man who spent his life tending to others. Still, nobody had ever inquired as to who would tend to him. He opted for the quiet route, accepted the position of being in the background, and then left for good. Hersha Prairie as Alice Garvey. Born with the name Betty Sandhoff, performer Hersha Prairie arrived on May 25, 1945, in Berea, Ohio. She gained the affection of television spectators when she accepted the role of Alice Garvey, the soft-spoken wife and loyal mother in Little House on the Prairie, starting in 1977 at age 32. This character became one of the most sorrowful icons of the program due to its agonizing and memorable conclusion that impacted viewers for 10-year periods. Hersha Parody passed away on August 23, 2023, in Norfolk, Virginia, at age 78. The verified cause was a brain tumor, a sickness that made her reliant on family assistance in her last years. Her son, Jonathan Peveril, mentioned that his mother's health faded rapidly and she passed while held by her family. Even though she was never a major star, Hersha Parody's wealth at her death was estimated at roughly $200,000, primarily from residuals from her classic television work. But what made Hersha Parody's name unforgettable was the debated death of the Alice Garvey character in the show. In a segment broadcast in 1980, her character died while attempting to rescue a child from a blaze, a traumatic scene that startled millions. That demise, per several critics, was excessively brutal and unnecessary for such an exemplary character. Gossip suggested that director Michael Landon pushed the plot towards tragedy to increase viewership, even though it greatly pained Parody because the audience couldn't distinguish the character from the actual person. After the segment, she was targeted with harassing calls and blamed for doing something wrong, despite only fulfilling her role as a performer. That event nearly pushed her to leave the acting business. While she had earlier been in Mannix in 1971 and had a minor role in The Waltons in 1976, she essentially vanished after Little House. On a single rare occasion, she went to a fan event in 2005, but turned down interviews, only offering smiles while providing signatures. Many suspect Parody lived with emotional wounds for her whole life, unable to outrun the ghost of Alice Garvey, the woman who burned to death in the minds of the audience and in the spirit of the woman who played her. Carl Swenson as Lars Hansen. Carl Swenson was born on July 23, 1908, in Brooklyn, New York. He started on Little House on the Prairie in 1974 when he was already 64, playing Lars Hansen, the Swedish woodworker who also established and first led Walnut Grove. With his benevolent face and deeply vibrating voice, Swenson gave the role a notable richness, becoming an ethical and spiritual foundation for the entire town in the program. Carl Swenson passed away on October 8, 1978, in Torrington, Connecticut, at age 70. Only a few days after recording his last segment in Little House. The reason of death was a sudden cardiac arrest. His passing startled the whole cast and staff, especially because the demise of his character, Lars Hansen, had just been recorded, as if destiny had already composed the plot. His memorial was private, and he was buried at Center Cemetery in Connecticut. At the time of passing, his wealth was estimated at roughly $800,000, a humble amount given a career lasting over 40 years, but full of love for the profession and peer admiration. The strange overlap between the character Lars Hansen dying on screen and Carl Swenson's actual death became one of the haunting tales behind the scenes of 1970s Hollywood. Only days after recording the moment where Lars Hansen passes in the arms of Charles Ingalls, Carl Swenson breathed his last without any parting words. People started to wonder, had Swenson become so lost in his character that he brought the role's destiny into his own life? Some staff remembered that in his last days on the set, he made mysterious comments such as, "I've lived enough of Lars's life, now it's time for me to rest." That remark now sounds like a forecast, but it was his death, so eerily matched with the character Lars Hansen, that guaranteed he would always be remembered by spectators, not just as a committed performer, but as someone who so completely became his character that he could no longer return to his true self. For those who believe in a role curse, Carl Swinson's narrative is its most tragic confirmation. Dabbs Greer as Reverend Robert Alden. Robert William Dabbs Greer arrived on April 2, 1917, in Fairview, Missouri. He started acting in cinema in 1938, but it was not until 1974, at age 57, that Greer left a permanent impression on television viewers as Reverend Robert Alden in Little House on the Prairie. As the benevolent, steady, and empathetic minister, he was present for the show's most vital events, ranging from weddings and baptisms to memorials. Dabbs Greer passed away on April 28, 2007, in Pasadena, California, from heart and kidney failure issues. He reached the age of 90 and was laid to rest in his Missouri birthplace. At his passing, his wealth was only about $800,000, a humble amount relative to the hundreds of characters he played across nearly 70 years in the field. Having never wed or had children, Greer's life went by softly, similar to many of the roles he played. Yet behind the benevolent reputation of Reverend Alden was a lingering professional blow that he never mentioned until a short interview with a local paper in the late 1990s. Greer confessed, "On a crew like Little House, I was the only one without a fixed shooting schedule. They only called when there was a wedding or a funeral." The comment seemed playful, but it indicated a distinct unfairness. Even though he provided the blessings for the program's most iconic scenes, he was always excluded from the primary story. While Michael Landon, Karen Grassel, and Melissa Gilbert became the faces of a generation of American TV, Greer stayed the man who exited the church on screen for only a few moments before softly fading away. Even worse, rumors suggested that Greer was removed from several vital segments even after coming to the set because of lacking screen time. A source from the show once remarked, "There were days when he sat in the makeup room all morning just to say one line, 'Amen.' It was that endurance and his unwillingness to protest that won him peer admiration, but it was also why he became what some termed a professionally forgotten man. Many believe Greer represents the collective tragedy of thousands of supporting performers who can never emerge from the shadow of others. Steve Tracy as Percival Dalton. Steve Tracy, born Stephen Crumrine, arrived on October 3, 1952, in Ohio. In 1980, at age 27, he won the affection of viewers as Percival Dalton, the smart and benevolent spouse of Nellie Oleson in the famous series Little House on the Prairie. This character not only gave him stardom, but also unintentionally created a relationship with underlying meanings backstage. Steve Tracy passed away on November 27, 1986, at only 34 years old from AIDS issues, causing distress during a period when American society was still full of dread and bias concerning the condition. His remains were softly dispersed under the letter D of the Hollywood sign. His wealth at his death was estimated at roughly $200,000, a humble amount for a gift that was just beginning to grow, but was ended for good. During the recording of Little House, Steve Tracy was viewed as a polite, friendly man, and was particularly close with Allison Arngrim, who portrayed Nellie. They were always together, constantly playing and sharing everything backstage, to the degree that rumors of a romance emerged. However, later in her book, Arngrim disclosed, "I was the only one on the set who knew Steve was gay." In a time when a career could be ruined solely for sexual identity, Steve opted to keep it secret. 6 months prior to his death, Steve bravely performed in the play AIDS U.S. Portraits in Personal Courage. He was the only professional performer in the show. The others were actual people living with AIDS or who had lost someone to it, sharing their own accounts. It was that time he shifted from a television actor into a hallmark of courage, and it was his death that moved Alison Arngrim to become a lead AIDS campaigner as a way to honor her final vow to her dear friend. Shannon Doherty as Jenny Wilder. Shannon Doherty arrived on April 12, 1971, in Memphis, Tennessee. She played the role of Jenny Wilder, the foster niece of Almanzo and Laura Ingalls Wilder, in the last season of Little House on the Prairie in 1982. At that time, Shannon was only 11, but she quickly gained notice with her sparkling eyes and an instinctive, mature acting style. Shannon Doherty passed away on July 13, 2024, at age 53, following a long struggle with stage 4 breast cancer that had spread to her skeletal system and brain. In her last moments, she was attended to by her family and her dog, Bowie. This well-known actress left a wealth of about $5 million, mostly from famous roles in Beverly Hills 90210 and Charmed. However, Shannon's professional life was not a simple journey. In the 1990s, she was dubbed Hollywood's bad girl because of many backstage arguments. During Beverly Hills 90210, Shannon often argued with peers, arrived late, and skipped filming without notice. Rumors about an arrogant attitude and a volatile mood caused producers to dismiss her after 4 seasons. Ironically, it was that defiant spirit that linked Shannon's image to bold, wild characters forever. She became a symbol for a generation of U.S. teenagers. Despite the backstage turmoil, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in early 2015. Unlike many who opt for secrecy, Shannon did the opposite. She publicly showed her treatment, her hair loss, and even sang with a shaved head. When the cancer came back and spread, Shannon continued to share her painful path, having brain surgery and various treatments while remaining hopeful. She stated directly, "If you ask, why me? I'll answer, why not me?" This was no longer a rebellious star, but a kind woman who turned a personal disaster into a way to spread cancer awareness. Ernest Borgnine as Jonathan Garvey. Ernest Borgnine, born with the name Ermis Borgnino, arrived on January 24, 1917, in Hamden, Connecticut. When he started on Little House on the Prairie in the late 70s, he was over 60, playing Jonathan Garvey, the benevolent, large neighbor and emotional support for the town. With his steady but strong presence, he gave the character a rare richness. Ernest Borgnine passed away on July 8, 2012, in Los Angeles at age 95. The verified cause was kidney failure after a brief time in the hospital. His memorial was serious and attended by peers and military members because he had served nearly 10 years in the Navy. Before dying, he left a wealth of about $15 million from over 60 years of hard work in theater and film. Borgnine's life featured a marriage lasting under 2 weeks with famous singer Ethel Merman. In 1964, Hollywood was talking when they married amidst much media attention, but only 32 days later the marriage ended in anger. Nobody knew the true reason, but Merman allegedly removed the whole section about Borgnine from her book. The public was confused, and people thought Borgnine's blunt personality, seen in his role from Here to Eternity, had entered his real life. That marriage caused him to be criticized as irresponsible and briefly damaged his reputation. However, instead of quitting, Borgnine focused on his work, showing he wouldn't be forgotten. After winning an Oscar for Marty in 1955, he was in many movies like The Wild Bunch and The Poseidon Adventure, showing he could play both heroes and villains. He once said, "I'm not a perfect man, but I'm always honest with my roles because that's the one place I'm not judged." Truly, from Little House to the cinema, Ernest Borgnine lived without hiding, even when facing debate. Melissa Gilbert as Laura Ingalls. Melissa arrived on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles. At only 10, Melissa won hearts as Laura Ingalls in the famous series. That girl with curly hair became a 1970s icon, a dream of the countryside where love and ethics won. As of 2025, Melissa Gilbert is 61 and resides in the Catskill Mountains with her third spouse, Timothy Busfield. Though rarely on TV now, she writes and does theater. Her wealth is estimated at $500,000, which is humble given her child's stardom. But behind the fame, Melissa confessed the biggest shock of her life didn't come from being famous. She noted that everyone expected her to stay that perfect girl forever. 2 failed marriages, alcohol issues, and a hidden spine injury all pushed her to the edge. She said there were times she didn't know herself. But Melissa found her way. She played Jean Donovan, a woman who died for others, a part that reflected her own path. Meeting Timothy Busfield turned her into a woman who liked chickens in her yard over the red carpet. Melissa Gilbert now knows how to deal with real pain and happiness. Though they left the fields of Little House long ago, they are still remembered by fans. What moved you most about their truths? Share your views and follow to find out more about classic television.